Last night, I was lost in the jungle with Pitfall Harry, surrounded by giant scorpions and man-eating crocodiles.
Well, Harry and I just grabbed the van, swung through the trees, and over the tar pits and found the jungle treasure. It was really neat.
If you haven't met Pitfall Harry, you're missing the year's most incredible video game adventure. Pitfall for the Atari 2600 and in television.
Since I met Pitfall Harry, no other man will do.
Pitfall, designed by David Crane for Activision.
Did you recognize who that was?
I sure did.
Right at the top? Who was it?
That was Jack Black.
Ding, ding, ding! Duke wins! Hello, world, and welcome to the Cartridge Club. This is Season 11, Episode 7 of the Cartridge Club Game of the Month podcast, where we bring together members of the Cartridge Club community to discuss our community playthrough. If you're new to the club or are interested in participating in future months, please join our community Discord, our forums at cartridgeclub.org, or follow us on Twitter at cartridgeclubNA. We would love to see the hashtag Cartridge Club used whenever you talk about one of the games we've selected. I'm Curtis, your host, and on behalf of our rotating pool of hosts, I would like to thank you for tuning in. Additionally, on behalf of the entire Cartridge Club community, I'd like to give a special thanks to our Patreon club backers. That's Joel Boyce, Kevin from Canadian Grooves, Bass Guy, Caleb J. Ross, and Dean from Round 2 Gaming. Thank you. It's March, which means it's March Madness. Now, usually here in the Cartridge Club, you pick one game of the month, you play that game, we talk about that game. And then I started something that makes a bunch of work for me every March. And that's March Madness, where we don't just play one game. We play a ton of games. I might choose, sometimes we might choose like a console, like the Nintendo DS. Play whatever you want on the DS. Then we'll talk about it. Sometimes we might choose a series like Castlevania. Last year, we played all the portable Castlevania games, and we talked about those. Well, this year, the Cartridge Club's been going for 10 years, 10 plus years now, and we have never once done an Atari game.
Shame.
So, yeah, for shame, indeed. So we're catching up this month, and we are talking all things Atari. The game we played was Atari 50, the Anniversary Collection, so we're going to be focusing on that. But really, this is all about love for Atari. And there is no one better that I would like to have join me than the man himself to my left, your right, and that is Duke from Retro Nonsense, the Atari King. Welcome, Duke.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be talking about some Atari, one of my favorite, if not my favorite console of all time. So very, very excited. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, you are the Atari King in my book. Between the Beat the Bandy challenges and, back to the 80s, all the stuff. It's always been about Atari for you.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a few things before we get started. Can you give me your history with Atari?
Absolutely. I had an Atari console. It was my first real console. I did have, believe it or not, a Pong console prior to having an Atari 2600 back when I was very young.
Was it an Atari console? Atari Pong?
I don't. It probably not. It was probably a knockoff. It was probably I think I remember it was the yellow one, but I'm not 100% sure. I just remember playing it on my black and white.
I thought you were a real Atari fan. No.
Well, that was out of my hands back then, but I have a vivid memory. I've talked about this before. When I acquired my 2600, my father bought it used off somebody at his work and brought it home in a brown paper bag. And I remember I couldn't play it right away. And I remember peering into the bag and seeing all the games and getting so excited because I knew about the Atari from commercials and stuff like that. But I'll never forget, I had to wait till, I think it was after school that day, but I could not wait to get home and dig through that bag and see what was in there and hook up my Atari for the first time. So I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. I was born in 1975, so this would have been very early 80s, if not 1980, 81, something like that. So I was a huge Atari fan from day one. I had a ton of games for it as a kid. And as an adult, I've been on a mission to recollect all the games that I had or played as a child and then some. So, and I'm very well into that. So I'm a avid collector currently, and I have a long history with the console itself, playing it as a child and playing it as an adult.
Couldn't have said it better myself. How many games we talking about right now that you have in your collection?
I have not counted, but I have a couple hundred, I'd say.
Couple hundred?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm not the type of collector. I really have a very curated, focused collection. I think there's 471.
a couple
Um,
hundred is a curated collection?
well, I do collect doubles and variants and stuff
Okay,
like
see.
that. I do
Oh,
like
yeah.
collecting the Atari. I'm sorry, the Sears variants. They're really fun to collect for. So I have lots of doubles and multiple copies but they're cheap, and that's the fun thing about collecting for Atari. You can get Atari games for $1 sometimes. So
Yeah.
especially at some of these conventions, they'll sell you a whole stack of them for a couple bucks. So it's a really fun console to collect for. And I don't know if it's a couple hundred. I have over 100. I definitely know that, but I haven't really counted them. But I have a shelf of them, and I have them all in order the way that I like to have them.
How
And
many did you own when you were a kid?
um, I can't say for sure, but dozens and dozens, because
Yeah.
so many of the games that I've collected as an adult, I knew that I had or played as a kid. So I had, one of the reasons is I was not wealthy by any means or anything. My parents didn't buy me anything I wanted. I had a large family, and I would get stuff from cousins and stuff. So I had hand-me-downs coming in because I was on the younger side of the cousins. So outside of that initial bag of games that my father brought home from work, I only remember buying a handful, but I would get them from older cousins and stuff handed down to me. So I was constantly getting a flow of games into my house for free, essentially. So that's how our family worked back then. It was a very normal thing back in the 80s to, especially with larger families, to give away clothes and toys. I did it myself, and that's why a lot of my stuff in my room here I had to recollect, because my mother made me give them away once I got too old to play with them. You don't store them, you give them to a younger cousin. So that was how it worked back then for me. So a lot of the games I had just came pouring in, and they were all for free. So I had a lot of them, believe it or not.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I think I misspoke earlier too. I think I said back in the 80s. It was stuck in the 80s. Correct?
Well, yeah, sure.
Ah, how dare I? I want to make sure I give you the correct plug.
Thank
there,
you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, before we get started, I guess I'll give a little history on Atari for me, and that is I never had it growing up. In fact, I'm trying to remember the first time I played an Atari game. I'm assuming somewhere along the line, because I'm not too far removed from the Atari generation. You know, I was born in '87, so they were around, but I was definitely firmly in like the NES and
NES
Super
era, right.
Nintendo. You know, that's what I remember. But someone must have had it growing up. But yeah, I really have no memories of it as a kid. I have no nostalgia for it at all, other than, you know, what I've experienced in my adult life, you know.
Right.
Which I guess some of those games now are starting to get nostalgic for me, because I played them like 10 years ago. I'm like, oh, that was a fun
Yeah.
time. You know,
Right.
I remember I have one memory of going to like the first time I went to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. They had one of those retro living room setups, you know, with the couch and the TV and stuff. And they had an Atari 2600 setup, and they had Kaboom on there.
Oh,
and I
yeah.
had never played Kaboom before. And we
Great game.
started playing, and I got sucked right in. I love that
yeah.
game so much. So fun. We sat there for a good half hour at least trying to beat each other's scores, and it was wonderful, magical time. And so a
lot of games are like that. I think Kaboom is Eric Mighty Q Dog's favorite Atari game, or at least one of them.
Yeah,
He loves
I mean,
that
if
game.
I had to pick, I would probably.
It's a good one.
Pick that
It's a
one.
paddle game. Yeah.
Yeah, fun. I did own it for a little bit. I have since relinquished my Atari collection and Coleco and stuff. I just, you know, you run out of room, you grow up, you gotta think. It's like your mom said, you know, you gotta give these things away sometime. Give them to a better home,
right?
That sort of thing. But we're here to talk about the Atari 50 collection today, and we're gonna do that right after a word from our sponsors.
Oh, sir, we like this Super Pong by Atari.
I'm sold out. That's a demonstrator, but I've got lots of these.
Well, we want Super Pong by Atari.
Yes, but
Super Pong's 4-color games are more fun.
Well, how about this one?
Well, no, you see, we'll have more fun with Super Pong's 4-color games. There's Catch, Solitaire, Super Pong, and Pong. So we'll take this one.
Okay, sure you won't change your mind?
No. Why?
Because I wanted it.
Super Pong. It's not just another video game. It's a real Atari.
That's the one you could have had, Duke. Did you have that other one he showed? That big gross
No,
one?
you know what? Can you see this? This is one I have now. This is the Sears Telegames version. Pong right there. See that?
That is cool. I like the
Yeah.
way those look, though.
I love them too. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
a
they're so
huge
big and blocky. Yeah, that's
Sears
so cool.
Telegame, wood grain, all that stuff. I love
And
it. Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm looking at your background. Like, can we just take it? Hold on, let me put you on the big screen. Okay, let's see. Okay, there's a. If you guys listen to the Retro Nonsense podcast, I can see up over your shoulder there is your car. What is it called again?
The Lobo 2 from
The
Sears
Lobo
again.
2 that you got.
So
Look at
this
that.
is gonna be awkward because I'm backwards, but
That's
there
okay.
it is.
Got the talking battleship.
But yeah, I got some. There's my Nintendo shelf behind me. Let's see if we can do this here.
It's so great. You got that Atari
gosh,
box
it's like
in there? Yeah.
There's my Atari. Let me see if I can just do it this way. There's my Atari shelf with
Oh, there we
some
go.
of my games. Gosh, this is so bad. But that's my custom-made Atari shelf there. There's some of my Atari consoles, and that opens up, and there's more games in there as well. But yeah, so there's a little room tour there. There's my stuff behind me.
Yeah, the Star Wars and stuff. Yeah, I noticed you got that Star Wars cabinet too. That's so cool.
Yeah. So there you go. Thank you.
That's so fun.
Back to business.
Thank you for showing that. I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous. I got a bed over here. This is basically my dog's bed.
Sure.
And then this is a giant recording booth for Layla. And that's
cool.
I have a little. I can't even show it. I can't move my computer, but I have a little retro corner for myself that I keep my VHS and TV and stuff on. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Okay, let's talk about Atari 50, the anniversary.
Let's.
So this came out a couple years ago now, or a year?
2020, I think. Yeah.
Is it 2020 already?
I believe so. Yeah.
Gosh, and this is a compilation of Atari games. And when I say Atari, I mean like no Activision,
right?
No third-party games. It's all Atari stuff, which is great. And it at the same time, it's almost like an interactive documentary. So they have little blurbs, stuff you can read about. They'll have old ads, and then they'll have videos of like the creators of these games talking about the creation of these games, how they came up with it, what it was like in the 70s working at the Atari offices. And then, of course, you got all these games that you can play, and it goes from the 70s up through the 90s and beyond. And there's little segments kind of breaking it down each way.
Yeah.
And so I figured that's kind of how we'll talk about it is we're not going to go through every game because this would be like a 10-hour podcast if we did. But we'll kind of pick some of our favorites throughout each. Is it segment? What would you
Sure, there's like 5 segments, right?
5 segments, yeah. And so the first one is called Arcade Origins. And this was probably my favorite segment because it's hard to get arcade games on home consoles. I mean, it's obviously easier now with emulators and what have you, but they had a bunch of games I'd never heard of. And you get to play them all. And I love playing. It's something about playing arcade games at home just feels like I'm breaking the law or something.
Right.
It was always cool as a kid to be able to play something that was close to the arcade game at home. And I just had a ball with this segment. So we're going to highlight some games that we love. Duke, I'm going to throw it over to you. What do you got for me?
Well, I picked, well, first let me mention that it's kind of ironic that there's a glaring omission in this segment, and that is my favorite arcade game of all time. And do you know what that is, Curtis, by any chance? Or can you guess?
Is it Star Wars?
Exactly. And that's an Atari arcade game that they couldn't put on here, obviously for licensing reasons. But that is missing from this segment. So that would have been my top.
Let's talk about it for a second. I can
Oh,
find
my
some
gosh.
video. Who doesn't have to be on this game?
Okay, then.
We're celebrating Atari this month. Duke, this is March Madness. You never know
That's
what's going to happen. Surprises abound.
This is madness, Curtis. We're talking
Yeah.
about a game that's not even on the game. Okay.
Tell me about Star Wars.
Well, that game I remember was at my roller rink, and that's where I first experienced it as a child. And I was a huge, huge Star Wars fan growing up in the early 80s, obviously, like every other kid. And when I saw that and heard those sounds and the speech on there is like authentic. and you could sit in it because the one at the roller rink was the sit-in version. They had a stand-up version as well, which is the one that I have here from Arcade One Up. And out of all the arcade games that One Up did, I only had room for one, and that's the one that I picked because that's, it's Star Wars and an arcade game, and it was my favorite arcade game as a kid. Because another reason is it's one of the easier ones to kind of beat, in quotes. You can fairly easily pick the easy mode, for a quarter back then, and you could blow up the Death Star in a single run fairly easily. And you felt like as a kid, you beat the game and you won, and then you go through another round and it gets a little harder each time. But it was really cool to go through those different segments. There's 3 different segments, and then blow the Death Star up just like you saw in the movie. And I love the vector graphics. It's something so just interesting to me about that style of graphics. I've always liked that. And a lot of the early Atari arcade games are vector, like Asteroids, and we'll talk about some of those, I'm sure. But I love the vector graphics, the fact that you could sit and feel like you're flying an X-Wing and almost like a simulator. And again, all the speech coming out from Obi-Wan Kenobi, use the Force, Luke, and you hear the same phrases you heard in the movie. And it was just nothing like it in the world to me as a little kid to sit in that cabinet and play and fly an X-Wing fighter and play that Star Wars arcade cabinet. So that is my favorite arcade game of all time for those reasons. And sad that it's not on this collection, but I understand that's with licensing issues, that's going to happen. But aside from that omission that they didn't have on there, I did pick for my highlights from that segment, Asteroids and Missile Command. I just think those are the 2 most iconic and the ones that I played the most as a kid and the ones that you would see the most in arcades. And having that trackball, if you've ever played the original Missile Command, that big yellow trackball in the middle of the cabinet was really heavy and kind of felt different. It was a very unique kind of feature for that game. And it had the kind of infamous game over, like the world ended, the nuclear war. It was very eerie and very kind of dark for the time. But it's just kind of it's a classic arcade game. And Asteroids, I played the heck out of that. Probably one of the first games I ever played for my Atari as well. I had a pretty good port on the 2600. But the arcade game is really good with those vector graphics too.
Can I tell you a secret, dude?
Yeah.
I hate Asteroids.
Really?
Hate it with a passion.
Stay in the middle. Just don't move.
Is that the trick?
Spin in the middle. Yeah.
Is that the trick?
Move.
Oh my gosh. Because I'll tell you, it's I don't know. I've never gotten that bite. I did play like Asteroids. I remember like that, playing that younger. Because I think maybe I found like in arcades and stuff. Because I would go to arcades and they almost always had Asteroids and Pac-Man, Galaga, and stuff like that. But yeah, Asteroids never appealed to me. And
well, it might be a little bit of a generational thing. For me, I always gravitate towards space games, especially early on.
Well, I love Galaga.
Star Wars.
Galaga,
yeah.
One of my favorites. Oh, I love Star Wars too. In fact, I love most space games except Asteroids.
Well, for me, any game that has a black background with stars and you're in a spaceship shooting things, I'm sold. That's just how I was as a kid. I loved it. So, I probably envisioned myself in the Millennium Falcon, blowing through the asteroid field in Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
So I just love the theme of it more than the gameplay, probably just the theme of it. But
I do like Missile Command. Missile Command's great.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Very fun game. Yeah.
Did you play with your friends and do like the high score thing when you were kids?
I don't recall that very often, no.
How long would you play then when you were a kid? Because it's not like a game like Mario even where you can try and get all the way to the end. Asteroids, It's like, how long would an Asteroid session be when you were a kid?
Minutes.
Yeah.
5-10 minutes, and then you pop another game in and play that for 5-10 minutes and pop. It's an arcade experience. So same thing at the arcade. You go to the arcade, you put a quarter in, right? You play a couple minutes and you go to the next one and try something else.
Not me. I bring a roll of quarters and I ain't leaving that Simpsons machine until I beat it.
You're a 90s kid. It was
true.
different. It was a different game back then. So the games got more complex. And they got a little more corporate, I guess, with how they were trying to get you to stay there longer and make you put another quarter into the same game. I think it was a little different earlier on where they want you to jump around and experience different games. And, it was just kind of they learned as they went, I think.
So I had a couple things I wanted to talk about. And one that I thought was so cool. And I wish there was a way they could actually like put this on the game. Because there's a lot of games on the Atari 50 thing that you don't actually play. They just kind of talk about it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is this thing called Hercules Pinball. Now, have you ever seen Hercules Pinball in real life?
Not that I recall. No.
Were you aware of this before this game?
No.
Neither was I. This is awesome. So basically, it's a giant pinball machine. The pinballs were the size of pool balls, like a cue ball. And I got a picture here. Let me throw it up. Oops, there we go. Look at that. So
That's a beast.
it's hard to see the scale, you know, but like
Yeah.
that's like 2 people wide.
Right.
It's huge.
Probably weighs about 1,000 pounds.
And I believe, I think it's like 8 feet long.
Jeez, oh,
Something like
that's
that.
hysterical.
You know what? I got my Switch here to reference some of these things. Hercules. Okay, check this out. At 7 feet tall, 8 feet deep, and over 3 feet wide, Atari's Hercules is the biggest commercial pinball machine ever manufactured. Instead of standard silver pinballs, it used pool cue balls. So it actually did use pool cue balls. Ultimately, once players got past the novelty factor, Hercules wasn't much fun. It was the last pinball machine Atari ever produced. So I guess it wasn't that fun, but still, how awesome would that be to play the giant pinball machine?
Very American, big and heavy.
American, you got that right. So I thought that was fun. One game I really did get into was Food Fight.
Yeah.
Did you play this one?
Yeah, I have that game for my 7800. It's a good game.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So it's you're basically trying to get to the left to get the ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And you got like what was it, like little chefs?
Yeah, there's ice
chasing
cream and there's food and ice cream and you throw
and you have a food.
Yeah.
That's fun. Yeah.
It's a fun game. I've only ever played the 7800 version. I don't think I ever played that in the arcade. So I think it's very similar though.
Yeah.
Pretty good close port.
That was a fun one. And then another one I really got into. Oh, this is another cool feature of the Atari 50 is they would have reimaginings of games. So like they might take a game like Breakout, for instance, and make like a newer version of it with fancy graphics or like slightly different gameplay. They might tweak some things. It was really fun. And they had a bunch of these on there in addition to the original games.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they would have prototypes. So games that never were released and, you know, they discovered along the way. And this is one of them. It's called, I'm going to butcher this. It's called Aka-R. Aka-R. But it's like, it's spelled like a pirate would say it. So it's like Aka-R. So Aka-R, this is a neat game because I've never seen a game like this. It's almost like a missile command. It's like a circle, and you're shooting enemies that are coming towards you. But as they get close to like your inner sphere, you go into like a zoomed in mode and you shoot them in there. Did you play this one?
No, and this is an arcade. In the
arcade this was an arcade prototype.
Sounds almost like Tempest a little bit.
Sort of.
Well, at least what you're describing with the cone shape or whatever, but
yeah, but it's just more like the screen is like circular and then you go into like a zoomed in mode. It was really fun. I dug that one. I would recommend that one.
And back to what you were saying with how it's put together, I kind of describe it as an interactive documentary, and it's really, really a unique and interesting experience. You're not just popping a game in; you're going through these timelines. And when these games come into the timeline, you can choose to play them if you want. You can look at all these detailed notes and arts on them and ideas and different things that were thrown out. And it's just chock full of all the information you could possibly want on this collection of games and the history of Atari. And it's such a great idea, and it's so polished. And even the background music is good. The whole thing is put together so well that I can't recommend it enough. It's really, really well put together. So
agreed. And one thing that's cool, I think when people think Atari, they think you immediately kind of go to the 2600, right? That's like for whatever reason, the representative of like all Atari is.
Well, that was the Atari. That's what we called it.
Right. I mean, but there's so much more to it. And there's the arcade and there's all the things that came later, the PCs and the Lynx and the Jaguar, there's so much more, and you get all that on here. Like for me, probably my least favorite segment was the next one we're going to be talking about, which is the 2600.
Right.
You know, and maybe that's because I'm more familiar with that. You know,
Mhm.
it wasn't as surprising. Where some of these other ones, I'm like discovering stuff I never knew.
Right.
You know, and that's part of the fun of this game is you're there. When else would you get to play these old Atari, like ancient Atari arcade games?
Yeah.
You know, outside of finding them in an old dusty arcade somewhere,
Or watching somebody play it on YouTube or
or
something. This way you
watching
get to do it
somebody.
yourself,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, like,
It,
when is the last time you saw a food fight cabinet?
right. Right.
Like, right?
No, it's
That's
a
awesome.
great concept and it works very well. And it's really hours and hours of entertainment. Again, you can watch things, you can play things, you can read things. It's the whole thing in one package. And it's again very polished, very well put together, very well thought out. They didn't really miss a lot, except for again a lot of licensing issues, which is a shame. Like you're not seeing even some of the Atari games that were licensed, like Superman and ET, are
Yeah,
missing.
it would
But
be
you know,
just a little bit sweeter if they could have got those.
right. But there were over 400 games released for the Atari 2600, and there's what 103 I think on this collection, just over 100, and that
Something like
includes
that. Yeah.
arcade and 90s era
Mhm.
and everything else in the PC. So I mean, they could have had everything, but with licensing issues, it just would have been.
And you get
They
your
just can't
fill.
do it. Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
I don't feel like yes, it would be nice to have those on there, but I don't feel I got shortchanged at all.
No, there's plenty of on there, plenty of games on there, especially considering how they put it together, intertwining them with the timelines and the documentary segments and everything. It's great.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next segment, Birth of a Console. Um, but before we do, got another little nice video for you.
Harry, let's see your best pitch.
You're out, Rose.
The Atari video computer system is 20 cartridges with 1,300 game variations you play on your own TV set.
You can't keep me in here, Atari.
Don't watch television tonight. Play it.
What? That is the most bizarre commercial I've ever seen.
That's Atari for you.
I mean, you got Pete Rose and Don Knotts.
Yep.
And like, what does he even say? Like, you're not going to keep me in here, Atari. And he escapes.
I think
jail.
that we're referencing Breakout, but ironically,
of course. I'm an idiot.
Breakout is not. If you look at the artwork on Breakout, it's like a space thing. They didn't know what they were doing. It's
No,
just
they
they're just
had
throwing
no
things at the
idea.
wall, and it's just weird and wacky. Lots of drugs.
And that was Pete Rose before his fall from grace. That was like
Yes.
when he was,
Uh-huh.
king of the mountain.
That's right.
Fun stuff. That's part of the fun. One of the things I love doing is finding these old videos, scouring the internet for
Yeah.
commercials and stuff. Which, by the way, I will say you get a lot of commercials and stuff on the Atari 50 as well that are fun
Absolutely.
to check out. Like there was one that they would play at movie theaters. It's like 2 minutes long that they would
Mhm.
play
Yeah.
before movies. That's insane. Just again, chock full of fun stuff. Okay, so the next segment was Birth of the Console. Tell me about your 2600 games.
Well, I picked two. Out of this group, I had to pick the games that had the most impact on me and are most nostalgic to me, and that is Adventure and Yara's Revenge. Two of my favorite Atari games.
I mean, classic.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Adventure for a second. Is Adventure?
Let's.
Can you beat Adventure?
Absolutely.
Because I know if for any of you that might not see, if you visit the Retro Nonsense YouTube channel, Mr. Duke over here did beat Pitfall, which was on the Atari. And let me tell you, I was, no joke, I was like riveted watching this, watching you like get really good at. You did it with Hero as well.
I did.
Those are so fun. Seek them out. They're so great. Like I didn't know there were some of these games you could actually beat.
Yeah, I had such a good time putting those videos together. Both as I recorded were the first time I ever beat them.
Yeah.
Especially the Pitfall video because if you watch the video, I literally mapped it out on a graph paper.
Yep.
Because you had, just like would have had to do in the 80s, there was no other way to do it. You had to take a pencil and a paper and map it out, because it's the only way you can beat it is to map out Pitfall, because you have seconds left if you get to do it. And it took me a while. It's not an easy game to beat.
Pitfall is like, to beat it, it's a timed thing, right? Like
It's timed. There's 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And you have to collect all the treasures in under 20 minutes, but you can only do it one way. There's only one way to do it. And you have to figure it out. It's essentially a giant puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's very complex, believe it or not. It would have been very, very, very difficult to do as a child, which is why I never did it. But as an adult, I was like, I'm going to do this. So it was really fun to put those videos together. And yes, there are a handful of Atari games, 2600 games that you could beat. Adventure is one of them. And I'll talk about Adventure a little bit. That's Warren Robinette was the guy who programmed that. And that has a famous Easter egg in there. And a lot of people claim it's the very first Easter egg ever. I don't think it really is, but it's definitely one of the very first.
Excuse me.
God bless you.
I'm so excited about the Easter egg. You made me sneeze.
He conjured up a sneeze, yeah. But there's a hidden room, essentially, that Warren Robinette put in the game illegally, because it wasn't allowed to, programmers weren't allowed to make themselves known back then. Atari thought that they owned everything, and the programmers were just like workers, and this was kind of the beginning of a revolt. And some of these programmers went on to other companies where they celebrated their names, and because they're artists and creators, and they should have gotten credit for that. But anyway, there's a famous room you can do this certain sequence and go into the certain secret room, and it has Warren Robinette's name. It's really cool. It flashes. And so that's kind of unique about that game. It's one of the first, if not the first, Easter egg that's kind of hidden in that game. But yeah, you can go. It's one of the first, if not, it kind of started the adventure kind of genre. This is a Zelda, kind of the beginnings of a Zelda game, where you have different screens that you would scroll through and find items and bring them to certain places and avoid the dragons. It's very primitive with its graphics. And that was kind of the joke, that you're just a square. But I didn't care as a kid. I was a hero, and I could see myself in the game as a muscle-bound hero like Conan or something, and killing dragons and finding golden chalices and exploring mazes and going into castles. It was fantastic. It was this huge adventure. It really was as a kid. It looks so silly now to modern gamers, but it was groundbreaking. It really was. So putting that cartridge in back in the day was just always a fun adventure. So that's definitely one of my favorites. Do you have any experience with that, Curtis?
No, not really. I don't have the patience now because it is tough.
If you're not nostalgic for adventure, it'd be hard to play.
I agree. I get it. It's featured famously in Ready Player One.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's what I remember it from. I don't know if I even knew about it before that book came out.
Wow.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe the Angry Video Game Nerd talked about it or something. I don't remember, but it reminds me a lot of Raiders of the Lost Ark is similar, and going and collecting stuff and just being like, what the heck am I supposed to do?
That's another, that one's even more. I think that's Howard Scott Warshaw, I believe, programmed that game. The same guy that did E.T. and Yard's Revenge, obviously. But that's because that one you do have to use the second controller and flip some of the switches. And if you don't read that manual, you can't play that game. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah.
So, but adventure is not that complex. You can, on some of the easier variations, you just have to find the chalice, avoid the dragons, and get it into the Yellow Castle, and you win. And it's got this really cool. If you can edit this in there, it's got a really cool kind of famous sound effect and flashing screen. Love it. Love it.
And then Yar's Revenge. I mean, that's a stone cold classic. That's fun.
That also has an Easter egg. Howard Scott Warshaw, if you do a certain sequence, if you kill the Yar, I guess that's the main bad guy. I think that's Yar.
No, you're Yar, aren't you?
Because you might be right. He might be the Revenge. I don't know what the bad guy in the fortress. If you kill him a certain way, when you're in the shield, in a very specific way, you see HSW on the screen. You see his initials.
Love
so
it.
he did kind of the same thing. Yeah, really neat stuff.
There's a great video. Do you know how he came up with the name Yar?
Yeah, I do.
So like, there's a video in the game that says I think it's like his boss's name.
Yeah,
was
Ray. Yeah.
And he would, a lot of times when he would come up with names, he would just take stuff and say it differently, say it backwards and stuff. And Ray backwards was Yar.
Yeah.
And he liked revenge because it's a cool sounding word. And Yar's Revenge was born.
Yeah, and again, that's one of those examples of just this wacky concept. I mean, you're like a robotic fly. There's a worm chasing you, and there's some weird spinny thing. And it makes no sense. Like, who would come up with this stuff unless you're on drugs? I mean, it's wacky, but it works, and the gameplay is what matters, and it's very, very fun to play.
And it's fun. And this was one that I really liked, the enhanced version.
Yes, yeah, really cool.
Because it's the exact same game. It's just like enhanced graphics and stuff, and it's just fun. I really.
In fact, during the game itself, you can flip back and forth. I think mid-game, from the old graphics to the new graphics, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, can you?
You can flip back and forth while you're playing the game. So it's really cool that you can do that. But yeah, it really looks great. It's very polished and very shiny and modern looking. But yeah, it's the exact same gameplay.
Yeah. Another one I want to talk about from this segment was Haunted House.
Oh yeah,
you like Haunted House?
I do. Yep.
So this is another one that I was a little confused at what you were supposed to do, but the enhanced version made more sense because the enhanced version takes it and puts it in 3D perspective. And that was when I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to
do. You had to use your imagination back then, Curtis. I could see that back then.
You really did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fun game. That's a great one.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I had fun with that. Any other 2600 games you?
Well, I mean, there's a ton. I just picked those two to highlight from that segment. So I could talk 2600 games for hours. So we'll just stop there.
All right. Moving on to highs and lows. This was like the crash, kind of highlighting the crash.
Yeah, this is towards the end of the 2600's life.
So why don't you talk to us about the ones you did like in this era?
Okay, so I picked there's a good side to this era, and that is, yes, there was lots of shovelware and junk, but some of the games were pushing the limits of the Atari to amazing levels. If you read up on how they put together some of these games, one of them I pointed out was Solaris. This game was unbelievable. It was competing with the NES.
I'm gonna keep talking. I want to pull up Solaris because I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, that's a really neat history to this game. This was originally, when it was started to be programmed, it was going to be the last Starfighter Atari game.
No way.
And yeah, so this was supposed to be the last Starfighter, and the crash kind of started to happen, and they weren't going to spend the money on the license for it. So you fast forward a little bit, and they just kind of changed it into this game, Solaris, which is loosely, it kind of is a sequel to Star Raiders, which was one of their biggest games ever, console games. So Star Raiders was a console seller, and this is some would say a spiritual successor, but it's really a sequel. The enemies have the same name, Xylons. And I think some of the planet names are the same. It's a different kind of gameplay, but there's also some similarity in the graphic, the graph screen where you pick where your ship's going to go. It has like a graph screen, and you kind of warp to that zone. That was very much just like Star Raiders. Star Raiders was that game that came with the keypad. You remember that?
Yep. Yeah, I remember them, and they talk about Star Raiders being for one of the PC ones. I believe that wasn't that like a, or am I thinking of a different one? That was like the killer app.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because it was very complex, and back then, pulling out a 300-page manual was cool. It was really neat to get really into these games and have all these nuances to them and complexity to them. And people like that. Now, it's a little different because you do all these walkthroughs on the screen. You don't have to read through a manual. But it was more common to read through these thick manuals back then and have a very complex game. And that was very, very popular game. Like you said, it was like a killer app, a console seller for some of those Atari personal computers. But this is essentially the sequel to it at the tail end of the Atari 2600 lifespan. Now, Star Raiders was also in the 2600. And it's a great game for the 2600. It's a great port of it. But this game graphically is mind blowing for the Atari 2600. It's very complex. There's lots of different screens, lots of different types of gameplay. It's a really fun game, and it takes, like, if you want to try to beat it, it's a hard game too. It might take you up to an hour to beat this game. It's really one that stands out. And a lot of the later games were pushing the limits of the technology, and they were putting extra chips in the carts and everything to get some more sounds out of them. And so there's some real gems in the later era. This what are they calling, the highs and lows? This era of Atari, although it's kind of has a lot of baggage and a lot of downside, there's some really cool things that came out of it as well, because they were really competing with these other consoles that were coming out, like the NES.
Yeah.
So
I just played Solaris, so I remembered. This is one. Yeah, you definitely need the manual. I was like, what am I supposed to do here? It looks cool though. It looks cool.
Yeah, it's got some great gameplay. It's got the where you're skimming the planet.
Yeah.
And it's got the space.
Yep.
And then there's also, like, you're in a tunnel. There's all these different variations of it. And it's a really fun game. Another one that Mighty Q Dog really likes a lot is this game. And rightly so. It's a great game. But aside from that, I in this same section is one of my favorite 7800 games, and that's Dark Chambers. Now, I think that's in this section because the 7800 itself is considered a low, because it did not do very well, even though it's a fairly good console. They didn't have the games really. There's a fairly small library of, I don't know, 60 or 70 games for it.
And it just felt like behind the times.
Yeah, they're just, again, you got Asteroids again, you got Food Fight, you got all these arcade ports. They did this to Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Joust, all these games that everybody's already played 5 or 6 different times in 5 or 6 different ways.
Yeah.
And here comes the Nintendo, and they're like, why am I playing Joust again? I can play Mario Brothers. This thing looks amazing. So it really didn't do, and they didn't market it very well either. It just didn't do very well. So, but that's Dark Chambers is like a gauntlet kind of game.
Yeah.
And it's really fun.
Mm-hmm.
You can play it all. I have it I like it so much. I have it in a box, complete in box. But in the title screen alone is worth it really stands out, because it has like a title screen, which a lot of games didn't have back then, that has like animation to it. It's really cool and creepy looking title screen. So, but it's a really fun game. It's essentially, just very, very similar to Gauntlet. Like I said, you just kind of run through mazes and shooting enemies and collecting things. It's very simple, but it's fun. It's got a great theme to it.
We both actually had this game. When you sent me your picks, I was like, oh, well, I'll let Duke take this one. But I also really enjoyed Dark Chambers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are my picks for that era.
Nice.
Or that segment, whatever you want to call it.
Did you know that there was an official Atari handshake, Duke?
Yes, I did. I didn't know back then. I learned that watching this or playing through this game.
But it's pretty easy. Let's see. You shake. Then what do? Lift the other person's thumb and grasp it with your hand. So it's like a joystick, right?
Exactly.
And then you rotate the thumb you're holding, make believe it's a joystick. So you grasp hands. One person puts their thumb up, the other person grabs it, and that's the joystick.
Let me tell you, if I knew about this, it would never have been done by me. There's no way I'm grabbing some boy's hand and grabbing his thumb like that. It's not going to happen. Back in the 80s, you didn't do stuff like that.
You never had a secret handshake, Duke?
It was much more manly than grabbing your friend's thumb and jiggling it around.
What's wrong with that? Just a little.
I can't even.
But I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
The Atari handshake. And then the other ones I wanted to talk about in this was the Real Sports series. So, this is kind of like the first home console versions of sports games, right? I mean, and there might have been some other ones, but, this is among the earliest sports games you could play at home. Before the Maddens, before the 2Ks, before all this really polished, nice stuff that you got today. You had Real Sports. You had baseball, volleyball, football, soccer, tennis, basketball, and boxing. Did you play these?
Yes. Really, the only one that I remember playing a lot, and I remember specifically seeking this one out and buying it because I really wanted it, was Real Sports Boxing. Um,
Boxing. Okay.
yeah, because I like boxing a lot. Mike Tyson was big back then, and my father liked boxing, so I watched a lot on TV, and so I was kind of into it. And the original Atari boxing was it was fun. I played it, but when I saw this, I was like, "Ooh,
Is
that
that the
looks so
one that's like
real." Yeah,
overhead?
you
Yeah.
can't tell what it is unless you know what it is. It
Right.
looks so
Right.
weird. It's an overhead shot, and the arms don't really
Yeah.
the anatomy is off. But anyway, it's a fun game. But when I saw this on the commercial, I was like, I got to get that. So I actually bought Real Sports Boxing
The boxing
for the
one actually is
2600.
pretty nice. Like it
It's
looks
fun. Yeah.
pretty good. I'm so fascinated by this because sports games today are so big. Like whenever a new Madden comes out, oh my goodness, it's like
Yeah.
phone call. The 2 weeks leading up to Madden, it's just phone calls off the hook. Do you have Madden yet? Do you have Madden yet? Do you have Madden yet?
Yeah.
Same with 2K all the time. But like I just, as someone who was there, you were, Duke. Like what was the temperature of these sports games? Like was it, oh dude, we can play basketball at home on our Atari?
Well, earlier before the real sports versions came, I played the original versions more. Like there's a basketball game, there's a
Yep.
baseball game, and I played those. They're terrible. Basketball's pretty fun. Bowling's great though. Bowling's fun.
Sure.
So they had a lot of these sports games, earlier versions of them that weren't as graphically pleasing, I guess. But one that I really want to point out is Winter Games, which I don't know if I guess it's a sports game, but it's not by Atari. It's by I think it's Enix or some other company, a third party.
Sure.
But it's a great. I played the heck out of that as a kid, and it has all these. You can play the toboggan, whatever it's called. The what's that called in
Bobsled.
winter? Bobsled.
Yeah.
There's skiing, which was my favorite. You could do the skiing where you jump the thing and do a bunch of flips and try to land on your skis. There was ice skating. So it had like 5 different game variations, and I loved playing that. That was really fun. So even though it was Atari 2600, it was really fun. So
Yeah.
I did not play a lot of the other real sports. I just played the real sports boxing. I don't remember playing the real sports baseball and the football.
I was
and stuff.
trying. The baseball one was hard. I mean, first of all,
Yeah.
I was impressed that you'd have all this stuff going on the screen. But I was really trying. I don't think I got one hit or strike. Like
Well,
I kept getting, either they would hit it or it would be a ball. I was like, how do you get a strike in this game? How do you possibly get a strike?
Well, when the NES era came out, it was much more fun. Like
Game
Blades of
changer.
Steel
Yeah.
and Double Dribble and the Bases Loaded, all those early NES, they were so fun to play. But I never could find as much fun in the Atari 2600 versions of sports. It didn't have the capability to have the full team on the screen and everything. It was just kind of a weird variation of the real sport.
Yeah.
It just didn't always work out.
Oh, before we move on to the next segment, I did want to mention, I thought it was really cool. They finished the Sword Quest series.
Yeah, yeah.
In this, so there was Fire World, Earth World, Water World,
Yep.
and then Air. Well, I don't even think, like, was it Water World never got released, or
Water World is the one that's so expensive I can't afford it. It's
yeah,
like
I
the
think it
real
was
rare
limited
one.
quantities. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was released. You're right, and I think Air must be the one that never even made it to the shelves. Yeah.
So really fun. I mean, this thing, it was like a real life competition.
Yeah.
You could
Yeah.
win stuff, and unfortunately, they never finished it. There were supposed to be 4 games and like a big ultimate prize. But talk about interactive. Not only did you play the game, there would be a comic that is featured on the game that you could read the comic, and there would be clues in the comic to help you and figure out all this stuff. Do you have any memories of this contest?
No,
No,
not at all.
Yeah.
This was right during the crash. It's intriguing, and I really like reading up on it and watching videos on it because it's fascinating. But I do not remember any of that from my childhood at all.
And it's just nice. It's just like they got to finish it here, in some form or another. It would have been cool to see that go all the way through. I would love to see a game company do something like that today. I mean, it's like Willy Wonka or something, like finding the golden ticket. That's just such a neat idea. I love it.
And it's such a cool story how this all played out because again, the crash happened and they just stopped, and there's all kind of myth about they had to melt some of the prizes down, and there's a swords out there somewhere, but no, they melted it down or something. There's all kind of like rumor and speculation about what happened. I think there's some truth you can find, but it's just really neat how there was a lot of mystery behind how that all played out, because it just kind of ended in the middle. Nobody really won.
Yeah.
But I think the first couple of contests were won, and somebody did win like a chalice or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the grand prize was like a big sword, like
I think
a real
so, yeah.
sword. But they never got it or made it or whatever. But it's just really fun to dig into all that.
Yeah, it's just a great inclusion. Yet another great inclusion on this game.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that finishes off highs and lows. Before we get to Dawn of PCs, another little surprise for you, Duke.
Hey, Mr. Block, can I go to the bathroom?
2 minutes.
Oh, yes! Right there. Oh, yes, yes! I'm in the tube! Oh, yes, yes! Oh! All right!
Introducing Lynx from Atari, the color video game you can get away with. Well, sometimes.
Did you recognize that? Did you recognize who that was?
No.
You didn't recognize? Hold on, let me see if I can.
The kid or the adult?
Hey, Mr. Block.
The kid.
Can I go to the bathroom?
2 minutes.
Hang on. No, who is that? Wait a minute. Okay, that's a good pause right there. No, who is it?
You don't recognize? You don't recognize Spider-Man?
Toby Maguire?
Yeah.
Okay, I can see it now.
Yeah.
That's hysterical. I did not know that was him.
Oh, yes, yes! I'm in the tube!
Okay.
Oh, yes,
I totally see it now.
Look at that.
See it now. That's funny.
Toby Maguire in a Atari Lynx commercial.
That's
How
great.
fun is that? Crazy.
Good stuff.
So yes, we're moving on to Dawn of PCs, and now this is when Atari got into the home computer market. Do you have much to add here?
I do actually. I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So this is the last console that I want for my collection, and that is the Atari XEGS, I guess technically. I had this console as a kid, and I guess you would consider it my very first computer ever, even though it was barely a computer. It hooked up to your television.
Okay, yeah.
And this is the version that had the pastel colored buttons on it, and it had the light gun. Okay. And I bought it off a friend of mine. And my friend was, I guess you could call him spoiled. He got a lot of things that he wanted. And when this thing popped out, it didn't do very well. It was a very short-lived console. It was competing again with the NES, I believe. And he had it. And I thought it was fascinating that my friend had a computer in his room, because back then nobody had a computer. It was just crazy. You had a keyboard and everything. I was like, "Well, you got a computer and it's got like a light gun." And coming out of the Atari, the graphics were better. And I guess he lost interest in it and he sold it to me. I think I cut some grass and saved up some money and I bought it off of him. And I thought I was the bee's knees having a computer set up in my bedroom. So I had that console and I played. It came with, I think, 2 games, or at least I had 2 games. Bug Hunt was one that you could use the light gun with, and then I had Flight Simulator, which is a very complex game that you had to use a keyboard for, and it was a very slow moving, just airplane. You just had made these little sounds. You had to try to land and take off. It was very, rudimentary, but I just thought it was the coolest thing that I actually had a computer. I was all big shot. Yeah, I got a computer in my room, because it was the coolest thing. That was the beginnings of having a personal computer, and nobody I knew had one. My parents didn't have one, but I bought a computer off my friend. There was no internet connection. There was nothing you could really do with that keyboard except play some certain games. And but I thought, no, so that I've been after that console for years and years and years, and I really try to find things in the wild, so to speak, and not buy things offline. I have never seen it. I did see the light gun, I think last year, actually, at Too Many Games, and I was like, oh, I found it in a pile of other controllers, and I was like, how much do you want? He's like, $100. I was like, what? Just for the light gun? He thought he had something special, and he kind of did, but I wasn't going to buy it for whatever he had the price for. But I'm after that console. That's the last console that I really want to complete my collection in this room, and I will get it one day. But
There you
that,
go, people. You can help Duke get the Atari XEGS.
yeah. So it's really cool. I mean, you could play other games from that era from the other PCs. Not the 8-bit. What's the 800 series games? Okay, so all the games that were the 800 series, you could also put into the XEGS. But it was essentially a console that you put cartridges in it, and it had a light gun, and you had a keyboard that kind of snapped onto the other part with the buttons on it, and then you just hooked it up to your television. So it was cool though. It was a fun console to have. I don't know how it holds up because I haven't played it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
But it's got the same thing. You can play Donkey Kong on it. You can play all the old, the arcade ports that they kept pumping out. So I don't think there's a lot of really special games for it, but it's one that I certainly want for my room. So I'm after that one. So yeah, I did experience that Atari XEGS as a kid. I had it for a short period. I don't remember what happened to it. Probably gave it to a younger cousin, but I don't have it anymore, and I'd love to have it back one day. So there's my little Atari XE story.
Well, we all hope you get it one day. Get it back one day.
Yeah, I collect. I take my time with my collecting. I'm in no rush. I don't care. I'll stumble upon it one day, and I'll get it.
Where are you gonna put it? Next to
right on my desk here, right in front of all these TVs I have. So I'm gonna put it right here, right in front of where I'm sitting right now.
Yeah, it'll look good. Well, one thing I was reminded about in this that I didn't even realize was Atari was the Atari Portfolio. You familiar with this, Duke? Atari Portfolio?
Yes, for reasons, yes.
So this was a kind of a pocket planner sort of thing. You could, I don't know, do all sorts of stuff. Who even had these? Like businessmen? Like,
yes.
Like who is this for?
Well, it's funny because I actually, prior to smartphones, I had what was it called? A Palm Pilot, early versions of those little. They were just gimmicks. I mean, you just kind of had like your phone numbers in there and stuff. You really couldn't do much with it, but it was just a neat thing to have.
I had, speaking really quick, little tangent. I had on the Game Boy Color, I have Mission Impossible, which you might think like Mission Impossible on Game Boy Color. Who cares about that game? And you're absolutely right. But it had an address book and a phone book like in the features for it. And I busted out the Mission Impossible like a couple years ago, and by gum, the battery still worked. And I had like 10 different addresses of like friends and stuff, and even a couple like girls I had crushes on back in the day. When back in like middle school, I had their numbers in this thing, and I was like, "This is great." In Mission Impossible, like, why was I using this for this? But anyway, side tangent.
We're nerds, Curtis. We like
totally,
we're
absolutely. So back to the Atari Portfolio. I don't know if you out there, Cartridge Club world, recognize this, but this was featured in one Terminator 2 when John Connor and his friend, who I only know as Budnick from Salute Your Shorts and Nickelodeon, steal money out of the ATM. He says like, "Oh, my mom taught me how to do this," and he hooks up an Atari Portfolio, as you can see here, and they steal some money to go to the mall and go to the arcade. So I thought that was fun. I didn't realize that was Atari.
I didn't know that either.
And then there is a really fun game that in this era called Yoomp, which is actually, this is a newer game, I guess. It was created in 2007 by a 4-person team from Poland. Yoomp is an action game in which a bouncing ball travels down a tube. The sophisticated graphics show how much can be done with 1970s hardware and decades of know-how. It's people making a new game for an old system and maxing out the hardware, right? And this game, if you watch it, it is like crazy how good it looks. You're bouncing down kind of a tube. It reminded me a lot of in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in the bonus stages when you're collecting coins and you're on that like kind of half pipe thing. Do you remember that? It's kind of like that kind of view, and you're just like a bouncing ball, and you have to avoid gaps, and it gets thin, or you might have to hit a thing that jumps you even further over like a bigger gap. Really fun, but just I like it more for seeing what people can do on old hardware when they max it out. It's just it's a fun one, so I would recommend playing that. And then we move into the 1990s and beyond, and this is the final segment in the Atari 50 game. And both Duke and I agreed there was one game that we absolutely had to talk about. Duke, I'll let you intro it.
Well, that game is Ninja Golf. What a concept. I had to include this one in my games to kind of point out, because who would have thought that Ninja and golf would come together in one game? There's two different genres. But they made it work. I think it's a very fun game. This was on the Atari 7800. It's a rare game, so it's one that I'm after.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a more expensive game. It was towards the tail end, and it's one of the more rare ones. But I played it on the compilation there. It was the first time I ever played it, and it's really fun. It's notorious. Everybody that collects for the 7800 wants that game, because it's, again, hard to find. And it's just
so weird.
It's weird. It's a conversation starter for sure. And I wouldn't say it's a really, really fantastic game, but it does work well for what it is. It's fun enough to play. It gets kind of repetitious, but I mean, I don't know. I think it's fun.
It's kind of like Kung Fu on the NES mixed with golf on the NES. Like you play this side-scrolling thing. This is like you golfing down the fairway, and then when you get to the green, like the putt, instead of putting, you like fight a
dragon,
like a dragon,
right?
Yeah. And then rinse and repeat.
You got to give him credit to have the gonads to green light something like this. It's like, who would?
So bizarre,
crazy.
but I love it. I love it.
It's too.
It's so weird.
Well, I've read up on it a little bit, and it's interesting. So that was originally going to be like a Caddyshack game. It's supposed to be like a funny golf game, not necessarily licensed, but in the spirit of Caddyshack. And the programmer was like, well, ninjas all of a sudden are really popular. Let's just make it a ninja golf, make it funny or whatever and silly. And that's what they did. So it was originally supposed to be a Caddyshack kind of game.
Interesting.
But,
instead of a dragon, it would be like a gopher?
Yeah, probably. But just because ninjas were super popular, they just kind of threw that in. So it was supposed to be a funny game anyway, like a parody or a satire.
Well, it succeeded because it's hilarious.
Yeah, I love it. It's fun to play. It's goofy. It works for me. So, and I love ninjas. I was all about ninjas when I was a kid. So
I
didn't care too much for
ninjas,
golf.
Duke.
Yeah,
are you kidding?
I mean, yeah.
Ninjas are back, baby.
Did they ever leave, Curtis?
You know what?
They didn't.
You're right, Duke. They never left.
They're always lurking in the shadows. They've been there the whole time.
Yeah. And then you got another one you wanted to talk about.
Yes, Fatal Run. So that is a game that was released. That was the very last game ever released for the 2600. Also released for the 7800. Both rare games. I don't have physical copies of either one of those, but I'd like to have both of them.
Is it this is rare, you said?
Yes. Yeah. Again, it was the very last game ever released for the 2600.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And the 70 version.
Sorry, I'm playing it right now.
Ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The 7800 version is also on the rarer side because it didn't do very well. But it's like Road Blasters, if you're familiar with that.
Or like Mock Rider, right?
Yeah. So you're or Spy Hunter, just a different perspective. Yeah. You're essentially a car and you have some mission and you're machine gunning cars in front of you and shooting missiles at them. And I always like driving games. One of my favorite Atari games is Enduro. And that's just a racing game that, it's one of those later releases. It's an Activision game. But the great thing about Enduro is that it gets dark and then it snows and you have all these different kind of backgrounds and everything. For a 2600 game, it was groundbreaking. It was really amazing what they could do with that later game. And it alludes back to what I was talking about before, about pushing the limits at the end of the life cycle of the 2600. But anyway, I've always liked, like Rad Racer on the NES. I always loved that
Rad
game.
Racer. That's the one I was thinking of. Not in Not the other
Well,
one.
you mentioned Mock Rider.
Mock Rider. No, Rad Racer is what it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mock Rider is the motorcycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still a similar game, but yeah, Rad Racer though you didn't shoot. You didn't shoot missiles and stuff. You were just
yeah.
racing.
I guess I meant like the point of view.
Yeah, it looks very similar. It's a red car, and you got the back, the camera behind the car. But in this game, you're shooting down other cars and blowing them up, and it's cool. If you liked Spy Hunter back in the day, this is just a similar game with a different perspective. But
yeah.
Again, it's not the greatest game. It's a neat game to point out because it's kind of rare and it kind of pushes the limits graphically. And I just love games that have cars and you're shooting and blowing things up. So, kind of had to bring this one up.
Yeah. Did you ever own, as we are nearing the end of Atari's kind of life with home consoles, did you ever own a Lynx or a Jaguar?
No.
Did you ever? Do you have any ambitions to try and get one?
No, I don't care. I collect for what I had and what I experienced. So I jumped as a kid from the Atari to the NES.
Yeah,
and that was my path. So
did you have a 5200?
No,
but you had a 7800. You said
no.
Oh, you didn't have a 7800?
No, I've only had that as an adult.
Oh, gotcha.
I went from the 2600 to the NES, to the Super NES, to the N64, to the GameCube, to the Xbox 360. To the back to retro games essentially, and went back full circle. So I never had a 7800 or a 5200 growing up, but I had a lot of Atari 2600 games. That's kind of, and I collected Atari 2600 pretty aggressively, even when the NES was out because I was older. I was probably 12, 13 years old. And I had my own money at that point. So games like those later releases like Hero, from Activision, and there's iMagic games like Atlantis and Cosmic Arc. There's kind of later cycle games I loved as a kid because the graphics were getting better and better, and the games were getting more fun to play and more complex. And before I had a Nintendo, I was buying those later release games and having a blast with them. Real Sports Boxing, as I mentioned, Hero, like I said, Solaris. All those really later release games I played a lot because I was, like I said, I was older at that point, had my own money. So I collected right up to the end.
Nice. Yep. Well, I mean, the just to touch on Lynx and Jaguar really quick. It's so funny because Layla's British. She says Jaguar. And like
Jaguar, yeah.
And I don't say Jaguar a lot, but I've heard her say it so many times. I have to like train my brain to say it how we say it versus saying Jaguar, because I really want to say Jaguar. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. But the Lynx was cool. It's kind of in the Game Gear camp for me, where like it's awesome. It's got the backlit screen, color, but the games suck.
Yep.
They look cool. They're almost like Hue cards or Who cards for like a turbo graphics.
Yeah.
But it's got the cool feature that you can flip it either way if you're left-handed or right-handed, which is neat. But
yeah, well, one of the downfalls of that and the Game Gear is they really sold it with those fancy graphics and the backlit screen. But my gosh, it lasted about an hour.
Yep.
And you had to go get new
batteries. Yeah.
And that was the brilliance of the Game Boys. It lasted for weeks, if not more, because they limited, and Nintendo was stuck to that kind of mindset. And they've been successful at it. But yeah, the Game Gear and the Lynx and all those fancy handhelds that were powerful and pretty, they weren't very practical at all. You almost had to keep them plugged in to play them, because otherwise you had to go through. And batteries were not cheap back then. It was expensive to buy batteries, And they took 8 of them or something. It was like the whole thing was batteries. It was insane how many batteries you had to put in there. And literally one car ride, and it'd be done.
Yep.
So. Just didn't hold up,
and the games suck on the Lynx, and then the Jaguar. There are a couple good Jaguar games, a couple. You got Alien versus Predator.
Yep.
I think Doom is a pretty good port.
Yes.
Jaguar. I haven't played a whole lot. I know there's Atari.
There's some kind of flying. There's a flying game, Fox something. Where you're in a jet, I think, for the.
Yeah.
There's
some, but overall, it's a pretty weak library for the Jaguar as well. And then Atari called it quits on the home consoles.
Yep, that was good while it lasted, though.
Yeah, I mean, very important. You know, they were. I mean, arguably, I think when video games first came out, people think the 2600. That's like the father of video game consoles. I think in most people's minds, that's
Absolutely
the home console that started it all.
For someone who, like myself, as old as I am, who have lived at the beginning. I mean, I was there for the beginning of the video game industry, and it was really it's been a fun ride to live through all these different eras of video games. It's hard to say what I'm more nostalgic for because I'm very, very nostalgic for the Atari 2600, but also the NES because that came right at a pivotal time. I think you're probably the most nostalgic for your pre-adolescent years, your like 11 through 14 kind of years. And that's when the NES was out. I was probably about 13 years old when I got my NES, give or take. So I have so much nostalgia for that console, and I just loved it. But my gosh, I have just as much, if not more, for the Atari 2600 because I played that from probably about 6 or 7 years old up until about 12 or 13 years old. So I played it for a long time, and I was heavy into it. I was, and not back then it was more niche. Like if you were into video games, not everybody was. You and maybe a handful of your friends were into it, and I was really into it. Like I loved my Atari, and I sought games, and I looked through the magazines, and I was really into it. And then that springboarded into my NES years as well. But I have a lot of nostalgia for the Atari 2600, probably just as much as the NES.
Yeah, that was for me. That was the Super Nintendo and the original PlayStation.
Oh yeah,
the Super Nintendo, I was a little bit younger for. That was like early '90s, and then as the mid into the late '90s, man, that first PlayStation was my jam. Oh, we got I might have to maybe next year for March Madness we'll pick a console. We'll do the PlayStation because
Well, how many games does that have? Like a couple thousand or something. It's like insane.
I want to say it's over 1,000. I'm not 100%. It's a lot though. It's a lot. Yeah. Fun stuff. Anyway, I can go on and on. But we're here to talk about the Atari, the life of the Atari, and we have reached the end. And this is normally the part of the show where I would do the 3 questions of doom. But I think it's the 3 questions of doom are going to be too easy this time. We both love the game. We think you should own it. It should be in your collection. We had a great time with it. So we're going to skip the 3 questions of doom today, and we're going to do Duke's top 5 Atari games. So Duke, take it away.
Well, this was easy because I just brought up my list from when Chris and I talked about it on the podcast a couple years ago. But I'll do it in reverse order. I'll go from 5 to 1. My number 5 is Adventure, which we already talked about.
Nice.
Again, just had endless time playing through that game, and my imagination soaring, and just loved it. It was such a unique game and springboarded the adventure genre in video games, so it holds a special place in my heart. Number 4, Cosmic Arc, which is an iMagic game, which is a great, you're not going to see these games on the compilation because these are not, Adventure is, but the rest of these games are not Atari games. They're third-party games. So iMagic had a great collection of games, some of my favorites, and this was my number 4. And it's great because it's another space-themed game and has multiple different types of gameplay. Another unique thing about this is it's known to be the very first video game sequel, and this is a sequel to Atlantis. Loose sequel. The little ship that flies away when you die in Atlantis is the Cosmic Arc that you're playing in this game, and they're both iMagic games. So that's kind of a little neat tidbit there. Return of the Jedi is my number 3 pick. Star Wars games, there was like 5 of them for the 2600, varying degrees of quality, but this was one of my favorites. It was a later release, Parker Brothers, 1983.
How does Return play on the 2600?
Oh, it's great. You're playing the Millennium Falcon. So how can you not love that?
Oh, that's right.
It's got the split
didn't have
screen.
That one. I had Empire.
Yeah, that's great too. Yeah,
that's a fun one.
So I love that game. Of course, you're piloting the Millennium Falcon. How could you not love it? Again, being the Star Wars fan and the space shooter fan, I just love that game. It's got great sounds and unique gameplay. Really, really fun game. Pitfall 2 is my number 2 pick. It is a fantastic sequel. Again, one of those games pushing the limits. It's got music in it, which you don't really hear in Atari games. You can beat it. It's got an ending, a little dance, and a little kind of ending screen that plays. So
you put Pitfall 2 over Pitfall 1?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's a better game.
Really?
It's amazing. Have you ever played it? It's amazing.
I don't know if I have played it.
Yeah.
I played.
You can swim in it. It's a really, really fun game. For the Atari 2600. It's amazing what they did with this game. Huh. It's a much fuller game experience than the original. I love the original. I have so much nostalgia for it. It's a classic, but this game's it's a better game.
Wow. Okay. Noted.
And my number 1 is Hero, another Activision game. Absolutely love that game.
Thought that was going to.
I did a video on that game as well, as you mentioned. You're a little guy with a helicopter pack on, and you're in caves, and you're shooting lasers out of your eyes and dropping dynamite. I mean, what's not to love? It's just such a fun game.
What do you think about the Star Wars arcade game? Wasn't that on 2600?
Yes.
What do you think about that port?
I don't have it, and I've never played it. But it looks like a very clunky. Yeah, it's the only Star Wars game I don't have because it's an expensive one. It's a rare one.
Oh, is it?
So yeah, it's probably a $50 game loose, give or take. Not that I wouldn't spend that much on it. I've never come across it, and I don't buy stuff online, so I always kind of hunt for them in the real world. But that's the last Star Wars game that I need for my collection because I have all the other ones. And there's Jedi Arena, there's Empire Strikes Back, there's Return of the Jedi. There's another Star Wars one. I forgot what it is, I think. You can edit this part out.
I'm keeping all of this.
Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, Jedi. Oh, maybe there's just 4 total then. I have 3. I think the Star Wars the Arcade is the only one I don't have. Okay. I don't think it's very good. It's probably not very fun to play. It's nothing like the ones you can play on the later consoles in the arcade, but I've never played it. I've seen video of it and stuff, but I don't have it. So
nice. Well, great top 5. Very surprising. Not what I would have thought.
Yeah.
So there we go. And with that, I think we are coming to the end of the Atari 50 anniversary collection. And before we get to housekeeping and goodbyes, I do have one more Atari treat for you all.
Introducing Alien vs. Predator for the 64-bit Atari Jaguar. You might not want to play it alone.
Ah!
Mom. Mom?
Oh my gosh. Nothing. That's hysterical. That's dark, man.
That was a good one.
Dead mother. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Commercials back then were so funny.
Love it.
Good stuff.
So yeah, that's all I have to say about the Atari 50. But we got tons of great Cartridge Club goodness coming up in the months ahead. In fact, as we record this right now in April, it is Zelda month. And we are playing Legend of Zelda Minish Cap this month. Have you ever played that, Duke?
Nope.
It's so good.
I need to jump on it. That's what I hear.
You do. So it was created Nintendo and Capcom.
Yeah.
And it's so good. I love it. I mean, it's hard to find a bad Zelda game, but if you like that standard top-down classic Zelda style, it's very fun. Very fun.
Because that was the Advance, right?
Game Boy Advance, correct.
Yeah, because I played the other ones. I played Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Time. Is it Oracle of
Ages?
Ages.
Yep.
Play both of those. Obviously, Wind Waker. I'm not Wind Waker. Link's Awakening.
Yep.
Is another fantastic one from the Advance. But no, that's the one I never played.
Makes me wonder what Zelda games are left for the Cartridge Club. We've done so many at this point. I love it. Then coming up in May, it's May the Force month, Duke. It's your bread and butter right there. Man. Have you played Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order?
What console is that?
PS4, I think. PS4.
No, that's PS4? Modern gaming.
That's
modern gaming.
Get out of here with that.
No, I've not played that. But real quick, I just played through Dark Forces It was just released on the Switch, PC era.
Oh, Dark Forces.
Fantastic!
Is that
Just
what kind of
beat it.
game is that?
That's
Is
a
it like
first-person shooter, FPS.
Oh, is it? I never
Oh, it's
played it.
great. It's
I remember
great.
when that came out, but yeah, I never played that one.
Oh, it's so good. So good. I just played through it. It's great. Loved it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right. Well, there you go. Dark Forces. You downloaded it on the Switch?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yep. It was just released. It's not really like a enhanced version. It's just like an exact port. I think it's slightly like cleaned up a little bit, but it's the exact same game you would have played on the PC
Speaking
back in the day.
of Star Wars games, I want to get on the Switch. There's a collection that has like the Knights of the Old Republic. It's got like 5 games. Like,
Yeah,
from
I saw
era.
that. Yeah.
Awesome. I really
Yeah.
want to get that one. Although, you know what Star Wars game I absolutely loved? Did you ever play Obi-Wan on the original Xbox?
No, I don't think
Underrated Star Wars game.
Huh.
Underrated. Very fun.
I did play the Phantom Menace on PC when it first came out. It was good.
Get out.
It was good.
No, it's probably good. I don't know. I never played that one. And then coming up in June, we got Warcraft Rumble. I know nothing about that game. What is Warcraft Rumble?
Got me.
Got me too. But that's the great thing about the Cartridge Club, people, is we do a little bit of everything. We got the new stuff, we got the old stuff, we got current stuff, we got, whatever we can, and we're always listening to you. If you guys got any suggestions, we'll always listen too. I'm kind of on the board, sort of. I lurk.
Big shot.
I see that. No. I see the movers and shakers and the big wigs talking, and I'm just kind of lurking in the background because I'm like, well, what are we doing for March Madness? That's me. But it's they're always very open to hearing ideas. And in fact, I think one of the games of the month is August is the Patreon one where someone gets to choose it. Anyway, lots of fun stuff. So again, if you'd like to get involved with the club, I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Cartridge Club NA. You can also visit our Discord for all kinds of discussion about the past, present, and future games of the month. Basically what I was just talking about before. There's also the Cartridge Club forums at cartridgeclub.org and the Facebook community and group pages. And to those of you interested in supporting the club beyond a review on the podcast app of your choice, I'd like to mention the club is entirely funded by pledges made from members of our community. We are extremely grateful to those supporters. And if you are interested in becoming one of them, please look into how you can do that at patreon.com/Cartridge Club. And that's all I got to say, Duke. I want to thank you so much for being here. I don't think there is any other Cartridge Clubber that could have done better than you at this.
I really appreciate that, Kirsten. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this. And I have a soft spot in my heart for the Cartridge Club. I've been with them for a long, long time, since the beginning. And it means a lot to me. And I was just on for Goldbacks, too, a couple months ago. I had a great time with the Q Dogs. And
killing it this year.
Yeah, I know. It's great to be back and be back involved. And I really appreciate the invite. And I love talking Atari. So this was perfect. Can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. And check out the Retro Nonsense podcast. I love listening to that every month.
Thank you.
It makes my 45-minute commute a little bit easier when when one of those comes out.
Appreciate that.
And yeah, I'll leave it at that. You guys out there in Cartridge Club world, hope you had fun, and we will see you next month or this month for Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap. Until next time, CC Unite.